Welcome to the Avenue Bookstore Podcast. I'm Anna Taylor. On today's program, we're talking about the new book, Murder in Mississippi. This true crime book reveals the bizarre and fascinating story behind the 2010 murder of Richard Barrett, one of Mississippi's most notorious white supremacists. Barrett was murdered, as it turns out, by a young black man called Vincent McGee. Was this murder simply another Deep South race crime, or could there have been more at play? Could it in fact be possible that this murder actually involved a dispute over money and sex? Joining me now to explore these questions is the very funny, often provocative documentary maker, broadcaster, and author of this very fine book, John Safran. Welcome to the Avenue Bookstore Podcast, John.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Avenue Books, for taking over Sunflower Books so well and making the transition very smooth for us regulars.
Thanks, John.
You kept the Jewish section up quite well. I know a lot
we like to service the Jews properly.
Yes, and a lot of local Jews were worried with the changeover of managerial hands that was going to fall by the wayside. But no, well done.
Thanks, John. So tell me, John, how did you first get caught up in the bizarre world of the white supremacist Richard Barrett?
I was filming a TV show, and if you don't know me, dear listener, I do stuff that, in the ballpark of like Michael Moore and Borat and stuff. So I did this prank on this white supremacist, and he started legal action against me. And that was that. And it just went on the cutting room floor, this prank on this white supremacist. And the reason I chose that guy in Mississippi, his name Richard Barrett, it was just coincidental. There was no reason. The producers of the TV show just sent out emails to a dozen Ku Klux Klan types across America. He's the guy who happened to get back to us. And then, so I spend 2 days with him. He doesn't let me use the footage. That's that. Then a year later, he's found dead in his house, with so many stab wounds around the neck. His head had nearly fallen off. And the killer, presumably to cover the crime, had tried to light both him and his house on fire. So I jumped on a plane because the trial was going to start. And it was like I was either going to be there or not be there. There wasn't time to, get a crew together or try to get it up as a TV show or whatever. There was only time to either get on the plane with my notepad and dictaphone or not. So I did. And then I ended up spending 6 months in Mississippi investigating the crime.
And how did you find out about the murder?
Because he was sort of like, he wasn't like famous. Like, even though the archetypes of these stories are very vivid, a white supremacist, a young black man, the Deep South. And he was like this weird character, Richard Barrett, the white supremacist, who, I'm trying to think of an Australian equivalent. He was sort of like some guy who managed to just get in the press, and then you're kind of asking, well, what actually do you do? So he was a bit of like the rent-a-quote guy. People are now sending me little YouTube clips of him, like on these different talk shows throughout the decades, versions of Oprah and Donahue, and he's like the go-to white supremacist guy for so many people. And anyway, I just found out about him being killed because I was, I really... But if my computer's ever seized and they check the history or whatever, and they don't understand things like irony, I'm just in such big trouble because it's just like a cesspool of me visiting white supremacist sites,
So you just found out on one of these websites?
Yeah, I just found out, as I do when I'm Googling and, just found out on one of the white supremacist sites that I frequent as a Jew.
And what is it about fringe groups like the Ku Klux Klan or the Freemasons that really fascinates you?
I like secret worlds. So it's some screwed version of, when you're young, like before you're 18 and you walk past like some door and inside that door is this nightclub that slightly older people go to, and you're not allowed in there, and it just seems so mysterious what's going on in there, and it just like plays up in your mind. Well, I've always been like that, but like with secret societies and secret worlds, ever since like being really young. And it was my dad's fault. Like my dad just used to tell me stuff. He'd go, that building on the corner of Burke and Russell there, that's a Scientology center. If you go on in, you'll be able to, and they give you this free personality test. And then so this was like, and it is like when I'm like 11. So my dad just introduced me to this crazy world. The other thing my dad did, he told me about this bookstore that was in Russell Street next to the Greater Union. It's up this little stairwell. And he goes, there's a white supremacist bookstore there. And I'm like, no way. And he's going, yeah, or whatever. And I just couldn't believe it. So I got on the train one time after school. This is again, I was probably like 13 or something, if that. And I walked up the little stairwell and there was this, and this again was like before the internet. I could not believe it. It was actually even before like Pauline Hanson was famous. So it was like mind blowing. I was like in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, except it was like in a little white supremacist bookstore, which I couldn't believe was in Melbourne. It's still there, by the way. It's called Heritage Books. If you're skirting with the idea of, maybe I want to be a white supremacist, I want to look into it more,
That's your place.
Yeah, not Avenue Books.
No.
the
Not
Jewish,
Avenue.
Yeah, the Jewish books, Avenue Books.
The white supremacist.
Counterpoint. And then sort of like you go, okay, I've checked out what the Jews say. Now, what's the other side of the Jews? And Heritage Books is where you go.
So let's talk a little bit about Mississippi. It's a pretty unique place. It's known, for things like the river, its hospitality, its contributions to literature and music. But it also has an appalling history of, racially motivated civil rights abuse. What do you think we need to know about Mississippi today to really understand your book?
I can only compare it with Melbourne. So in Melbourne, we've got all these like caramel people. Like you've got like the black people and the white people, but you've got, like Arabs and Indians and Asians and sort of like halfies of all those combined. Whilst Mississippi, it really strikes you that there are like pitch black people and glowing white people. And that's it. They don't, if you had like overly thick Italian eyebrows in Mississippi, you'd kind of stand out and be like, oh, who's this exotic ethnic? Almost like if you don't have blonde hair, you stand out. Yes, and it's so you need to understand that. I guess that's what's so weird about it is not so much that it's black and white divided, but there's also not that many in between. Like there's not even that many Latin American people, for instance. So. And they self-segregate and voluntarily. Like if you look at the census over the last 10 years, there's been this like voluntary self-segregation. So the black people have they're in Jackson, and then the white people are in this county called Rankin County. That's just like two of the areas, and I think it's similar like that in the rest of Mississippi.
How long were you in Mississippi for?
6 months, or just under 6 months. I went there for 1 month. As I said, I just decided to jump on the plane because I wanted to arrive a month before the trial was to begin.
And how did you get started? Like, where did you begin when you arrived?
Back in Australia, I spent 6 months. I kind of gloss over this in the book because not gloss over it, like you just have to crunch things. But I did spend a lot of murky time, like 6 months in Australia, sort of trying to figure out whether to go or not and what I do and... and so I did make contact with this black journalist called Ernest McBride, and he said, when you come on over, come on in or whatever. So I made contact with him. I made contact with who else did I make contact with? I tried to make contact with like this white supremacist friend of his, Jim Giles of the Killed, and I tried to contact the lawyers of Vincent McGee. I tried to friend Vincent McGee on Facebook. I did all that. I was ringing the court there or whatever to try to one thing that was really exciting for me just for future storytelling is that so everything is not on the internet. Like not only is things like for instance when I was in Australia and I was trying to find out when is Vincent McGee's trial, there just wasn't anywhere to go. Like I could type into that search engine Vincent McGee and nothing, and you go to the website of the thing and of the court, it's not there. And then I'd ring up the court from Melbourne and they'd say they wouldn't even know when it was starting. So it was like this, it was really tense. And anyways, and then when I got there and I found a lot of the book is me finding, or some of the book is me finding these documents, and all of those aren't online. They're just like these little things hidden in manila folders in tiny courts. But then above and beyond that, the real stories are in people's heads.
Were people quite forthcoming? Did you have to employ some, like,
I had to be
tactics to make them tell you stories?
Yeah, I learned, this is what I learned. I've got so many ways to answer that. One thing I learned is the way to get someone to talk is you don't say, oh, tell us about this, or what's racism like in Mississippi, or did you kill him or not? And you don't do that. What you do is you find out something that someone else is saying about them, and then, so for instance, with the killer, I said to him, he just wouldn't talk to me. I'd be going, oh, tell us about, like, growing up, and were you violent as a kid? And he just, like, I don't know, just didn't create momentum. But then I went back to him and I said, your cousin says that when you two were little, you used to have to, like, break into houses, and you used to, you tricked him into breaking into a house because he never wanted to break into a house. And then the killer's like, in his language, that's bull. That's crap. And blah, blah, blah. And then he sort of like, and then he tells his thing, and I go, that's what you have to do.
So he kind of gets drawn into it without realising.
Yeah. You find out a version of something from someone else, and then say, this is what they say. And they're like, what? No. And then, so that's why I learned how to get stuff out. Generally, people were fine the first time I met them, and then they'd close off.
Okay.
So I don't know why. That could be anything. They could have Googled me, or I think it was just...
And that's actually, when people close off, that's actually probably my favourite part in the book.
Yes.
When people start closing down and you get really frustrated. And you're like, this isn't what's supposed to happen.
I know.
This is not how I had, imagined this would all play out in my mind.
Yeah, sure.
What did you do when that happened?
I was really annoyed at the time. I now realise that... I wasn't going through a unique thing. It's like every true crime writer or non-fiction writer who does what I do is getting all these weird, staticky, strange versions of things. But they just decide to go, screw it, I'll go with this for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really in this odd circumstance, but I didn't know that. And also this just wasn't my style to kind of go, well, I'll go with that version.
Did you ever feel like this is not coming together, this is not going to make a good story?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm kind of like delusionally optimistic. So, no, I did think there were. I was. What I really regret is I was really so fearful. I was obsessed that I wanted to get Richard's sister for some reason. Richard Barrett, the killed sister, because she was the only living relative, and he had no other connections, and he didn't even have friends, and she was so hard to find. So I was obsessed with tracking her down. And I was also, I guess, wanting to get access to the killer. And I just thought I wasn't going to get access to the killer. So instead of writing down those doubts, which in retrospect would have been cool for the book, like, I kind of dodged around it. So in my head, I'm having this meltdown, like I'm not going to get in contact with the killer or with the sister, but I didn't record that. And then sort of like late in the piece, I tried to like retroactively write it, but it was like too late.
Build a bit of angst.
Yeah, I've actually got on my dictaphone recordings me trying to fake things that I missed out. I'm like there going, oh my God, I should have recorded this months ago about my doubt. And it's me putting on this, me faking like my angst about how I'm not going to meet the sister. But that didn't work for the book. So yeah, that didn't make it.
And in terms of the actual writing process, how did writing a book compare to some of the writing you've done for, say, television?
I found researching it, which I guess is kind of writing it, like far more stimulating, because you just had more time, and people could be bad talent, like they talk in a boring way, they talk in a really long, like it's something that just wouldn't work for TV, but that works for a book, because you just omit that they're saying this in a very dull, or not dull, but in a sort of tedious way or whatever. So yeah, so you can do that. Then, so I like that. I like how you could just lean against the car and talk to someone, and then if they had a story, and then you could run off and write it. So I like that. Whilst on TV, we just land somewhere for like a day and a half, if that, and then we have to get everything, and just. It's
a different pace.
Yeah, it's a different pace, and you can only... That's why I often write with my TV stuff, write them almost like with story arcs, like a comedy thing, because if I'm like the protagonist that's sort of determining what's happening, then you know you're going to get something. Whilst with this, I could like just let things float a bit more, and yeah, so I like that. And then when I came back to Australia, I was so stressed out because I'd never written a book before. I just started reading things like travel journals, I guess what you call them, or like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and Naked Lunch and what else? On the Road. I just read anything that I thought was going to help me understand how do you write a kind of cascading travel adventure. Mm-hmm. And I read heaps of true crime books before I went, and whilst I was over there to try that was sort of like trying to figure out what you're meant to do.
Did they help you? Or?
Yeah, definitely.
What did you learn from them?
Well, I'm a big believer in, like, the pendulum can swing too far this way or that way. And this whole thing, this kind of cult of, it's something I have to do. It has to be, like, really original. And, God, if I learn any rules to anything or any parameters or the way or any structures or any skills, I'm stifling my creativity. Like, it's just crap. It's like everyone's got, I find it much easier when I've got like parameters, and then I always try to squeeze my stuff into there. I'm usually like trying to make my stuff really as normal as possible, and then it still comes out mad anyway. But like with this book, when I worked with the editor at Penguin, I just said to him, I'm just going, listen, I'm not trying to make this book some, clever postmodern thing where I think I'm too good to just write a book or something, or because I think you have to like really know how things work before you start kind of twisting them on their heads, if you know what I mean. Like maybe after I write 5 books, I can write an anti-book book. But regardless of that, anyway, it still comes across as mad anyway. The book, because I just thought the story was so mad in its simplest form. Like when I used to tell people the story of what happened,
it's pretty mad.
Yeah, I just thought, why would I sort of touch that by trying to do something too like clever.
Well, congratulations on the book, John. It's a terrific read.
Thank you, Avenue Bookstore.
Thanks for talking to the Avenue Bookstore.
Sunflower Books.
That was John Safran speaking about his new true crime book, Murder in Mississippi, published by Penguin Books and available at the Avenue Bookstore now. I'm Anna Taylor. Thanks for listening to the Avenue Bookstore Podcast.